So I'm over at my friend's house, staying with a friend for a couple days, and his teenage daughter has anorexia and was hospitalized a year ago, and received Western type care, both in terms of, I believe, in terms of like nutrition and psychotherapy and all the things that allopathy does with anorexia. And then she seemed to get better, and then she had a relapse a year later, and was taking laxatives. So she's anorexic, she's already like barely eating, and then she starts taking laxatives. And so I asked my friend, I was like, if you're interested, I can try to help here. It wasn't like an Ayurvedic consultation, right? Like, this is just a friend who is in this situation with his daughter, and I'm kind of actually curious from an Ayurvedic perspective, like what's going on in her body. Now, one of the things with being immersed in Ayurveda and immersed in yoga is you slowly train or entrain your consciousness to zoom out, to actually like look for holisms, look for the bigger picture. Right? What is like in the biggest possible picture is going on here. Now, this is really important because often in Western medicine, there's a tendency to zoom in and to zone in on the problem itself, right? And I've known for me, like, this has taken me like a longer time to learn. Like in the beginning, I was just scared of big scary diagnoses and people in pain and suffering, and I would try to solve problems more from the side of my intellect. But slowly I've learned how to ask myself the question, and this is like one of my favorite questions, of like, what's really going on here? Like, if I were to look at this with all the like cool terminology of Ayurveda, like, how might we describe in the bigger picture what's going on here? What's this person's constitution? What time of year does this person go out of balance? What's this person's Agni type? What else is going on in this person's life? Like, what is happening in this person's time of life? And then I can start to look at what's really going on. So what I'm going to do is go into, again, from an Ayurvedic perspective. Ayurveda is not the only perspective. It's a perspective. It's one that here in the Living Ayurveda course we're interested in. I'm going to turn this part into a podcast too, you guys. This is one of the ways I was thinking that I might be able to help this person. Okay, so now if we are looking at a human being and we're asking ourselves, what's their constitution? In terms of Vata, Pitta, Kapha, Vata, Pitta, Vata, Kapha, Pitta, Vata, Pitta, Kapha, Kapha, Vata, Kapha, Pitta, Vata, Pitta, or Kapha, right? We have like I think it's like 9 different types. So what is the person's constitution? When, or like what times of year are they going out of balance? And if you look at your own health history, you'll find that in certain seasons and certain times of year, you go out of balance more than others. In certain seasonal transitions, you'll go out of balance more than in others. And then the third question is, what is their Agni type? Especially when we're dealing with situations that are in the digestive tract, between mouth and anus, are very much in there. But in Ayurveda, and you'll learn this more when you go to what is disease and what is health, is that in Ayurveda, they're saying all imbalances arise in the digestive tract first. So somewhere between the mouth, the stomach, the small intestines, large intestine, and the anus, that we're going to see signs of imbalance there first before they go into deeper levels of tissue. When we have an imbalance like anorexia, that clearly has a lot to do with the digestive tract. You could also say it has a lot to do with the mind, because there's issues of control. And then we can get back into the chicken and the egg of like what happened first. Either way, I want to know what their digestive type is. I want to know what's going on with their digestive. And I'm going to want to know before the dis-ease, and then I'm going to want to know what's the current state, because obviously any imbalances that are in the digestive tract will affect the digestive tract more. So someone might come in with a certain type of Agni, and then the disease itself actually affects the Agni or the imbalance. Okay, so I asked my friend questions about his daughter. When she was little, was she like a skinnier kid? Or was she, pretty lithe and muscular? Was she like a muscular kid, or was she a little on the, on the softer, pudgier side? And she's a skinny kid. And then just asking, like, is she someone that gets really intense and focused, or can she pivot from one thing to another thing easily? And I'm just trying to get a sense in like the broadest picture, like what's this person's constitution? So I asked a bunch of questions, and I think I got to a place of where understanding her constitution to be Vata Pitta in terms of her physical body, and Pitta Vata in terms of her mind. So she could really focus and get absorbed in something, and he could too. And they have a lot of similarities in their bodies. Sometimes when a parent is similar to a child, it's really easy for them to see their similarities, and it's also easy for them to see their differences, right? So like Winston and Indy have a lot of similarities in their Agni type. Like they burn slow and deep. They get very involved in physical activities, like building stuff. They can do that for hours. Have a hard time concentrating in audio visual. Like that's my child and partner's father-daughter pattern, right? Sometimes it's easy to see these things. In any case, upon the questions, that's where I ended up after asking maybe 5 minutes of questions along those. So when at time of the year is she going out of balance? She's going out of balance in the fall. Now that's when there's school, there's stress, but in Ayurveda too, if we look at the seasonal cycles, fall has the energy of wind, and it's the season, therefore, of Vata. Okay, so now I'm thinking, okay, there's a Vata person, and it's Vata season. So now I'm curious about what's going on with Agni. We've got Vata person, and it's the fall. Now, a little side note on anorexia. So anorexia nervosa. So anorexia is a term, and then anorexia nervosa is another term. Anorexia is a loss of appetite. Anorexia nervosa is this. Nervosa is telling you it's happening at the level of nerves and mind. And it's saying that there's basically a desire not to eat, right? That there's a decision to not eat. And so when someone gets hospitalized for anorexia nervosa, if we look at that condition or disease or that pattern, it's a mind over matter, where the mind has decided to starve the body. Yeah, I mean, in the simplest terms, it's something along those lines. And it's intense for the body, right? Because the body likes rhythm more than anything. Our body loves rhythm. It loves the rhythm of eating and sleeping and pooping and right, doing all the things. But like those rhythms, when the body's in rhythm with that, the body's really, really happy. So when the mind starves the body of food, it really disrupts all of those rhythms. Okay, so that the nature of, now if we kind of get that on the page, that like, what is the nature of the disease? And what we find is that it takes a lot of mental control. It takes a lot of focus to starve the body. And so the nature of the disease, it has a pitta element. It has an element of control. And so that's where we can start to see like, okay, the nature of the disease. Okay, her mind has more pitta, right? We said that was the strongest force in her mind, is the mind of fire, of intensity, of focus. And now we know that the nature of the disease is that it has a pitta component to it. So what's helpful here, as we're learning is we're learning how to think about something that might be big and scary and life-threatening, like anorexia nervosa, is that if we can see a pattern, we can start to understand it. So with understanding comes a perspective change. So as we start to be able to understand something that's happening, it actually helps us become sympathetic or empathetic even to ourselves. And that's part of the process of healing. We know from studies that just actually receiving sympathy and empathy are very, very helpful in the healing process, even from people we don't know. Super, super fascinating. Okay, next question is, what is that? So now I'm in detective mode and I'm asking a number of questions. And I'm asking about what happens, you know, as a kid, would she get so focused on something that she'd forget to eat? And what's interesting is, like, this takes a little bit of, if we're not used to recognizing these patterns, we often have to ask that same question in about 5 different ways. Like, is she ever like really involved with schoolwork and just wants to get it done before dinner time? Like, we'll just push that boundary, because some kids will not do that, right? Some kids are like, I'm eating, that can wait. Some kids have that pattern of like, I need to eat right now, right? And so that's a different pattern. And so this child actually does have a pattern of appetite being irregular. So when I'm looking for an Agni type, is there a history of appetite being irregular? Is there a history of bloating or gas or discomfort upon eating? Is this a pattern? Is there a pattern of constipation? Is there a pattern of any kind of discomfort in the digestive tract? So I'm just zoning it right in on Vata first. Why? Because I'm already seeing Vata. So I just want to know. And I'm just getting to these questions, I'm getting yeses. And then questions about what's going on right now. Is she complaining about being bloated? Yes. Is it uncomfortable for her to eat? Yes. Why? Because she gets bloated. Okay. Now I have some idea of, we're well into the territory of Vishama Agni. The season that I'm having this conversation is autumn. She's in a time of life, she's in high school, and there's a lot of new things starting in the fall in high school. So there's transition. When there's new things starting, there's transitions. And there's also a lot of excitement, which is opposite is nervousness, and there's stress. And so all of these things are these are all in the category of Vata. So now this is important to me, because a disease like anorexia nervosa, or any disease, when we look at it from allopathy, like, we're looking more at the nature of the disease. When we look from an Ayurvedic perspective, we're much more zoned in on that this is a unique individual, that this individual has a mental constitution, they have a physical constitution, they have an Agni type, and they have a health history. And so now we're able to actually look at the person in front of us and say, like, is there any way I can help the person right in front of me, this unique individual? Now, someone that has a Pitta type of anorexia, they're going to probably have Tikshna Agni. They're going to have a different Agni type, and that will require a lot more mental focus to actually have this disease. This is my opinion. But if you have Tikshna Agni, like, anorexia nervosa is going to be tough, because you're going to be hungry. You're going to have to do mind over matter, mind over matter, mind over matter. If your appetite's already irregular and you're nurturing that irregularity and you're not actually hungry and it's uncomfortable to eat, it's actually easier to not eat. It doesn't take as much mental willpower to not eat. So then I might ask questions along that line, like, does it seem like, really hard for her to not eat, or does it seem like eating's harder? Eating's harder. Okay, that can also happen from the development of that disease as it goes down that road. You can develop Vishama Agni. You start to display more and more of a Vata, type, because basically the physicality is starving, so more Vata tendencies will rise. All right, so now I know I'm in Vishama Agni imbalance. I'm in fall. There's a lot of transition. There's a lot of social pressure. There's a lot of stress, so that I know that the nature of the person, will say she was Vata to start out with, but now we know that the nature of the disease is that Vata is really high. And so initially, Vata was high and Pitta was like just a tiny bit high. Right now, like Vata is really high. Pitta's probably not that high. It's like Vata, we're like Vata mania here. So like Vata's very, very, very high. There's a lot of wind. There's a lot of irregularity. And so then when I look at the laxative side, right, of like, okay, and she's because there's gas and bloating, to me now laxatives actually make a ton of sense. Like, of course she'd want to take laxatives because she's in pain. She's in digestive pain. And that I always assume that the person I'm talking to is like really intelligent and trying to help themselves. Even if it looks like a little crazy to other people, I'm like, there's an intelligence in there. So she's taking laxatives because digestion's uncomfortable, and no one. And now I'm getting curious. Is anyone helping? Because I'm just focusing on Vishama Agni at this point. I'm like, this poor gal, it hurts to eat, and she's bloated, and she can't poop easily because there's probably just not enough power of digestion to help with power elimination. So not eating is easier, and then there's just not a big enough food bolus to actually, like, you need a big enough food bolus to actually stimulate peristalsis. And so if that's not there, then everything's just going to feel stuck, and then it gets dry. The longer stuff's in your digestive tract, the drier it gets dried out, and then it gets hard, and then it becomes just like block, and then that aggravates digestion because now there's actually energy moving up. Energy moves up in the digestive tract and actually makes it harder to digest food in the stomach. So then the food comes in and it's like energy's moving up instead of moving down, and then rinse, repeat, and right, it's tough. So laxative seems like a really brilliant idea at this point, right? Like at least just get things moving. But in anorexia nervosa, it's also part of the abuse pattern, right? Where they won't allow, if you take laxatives, there's not enough nutrients in the digestive tract for long enough to get absorbed to create tissue. So it's also part of your community, right? And so that's why it's a big alert in that community and in the treatment nervosa from an allopathic perspective. There's a very well-developed understanding of Agni, right, in that community and the different types of Agni, et cetera. So we're just coming at it from a different angle here. All right, at this point, I'm like, I'm treating a Vata teenager with Vishama Agni. That's what I'm thinking. So my number one thing that I'm thinking, anytime we're dealing with Vishama Agni, my number one tool is spice. The spice is right? So now I'm going to play the spice game. So the first thing, and we're hanging out in the kitchen, and so I ask my friend, I'm like, can I see your spices? He's like, what? I'm like, yeah, like whatever you got. Cinnamon, ginger, fennel seeds, mustard seeds, like whatever you got. I'm just trying to get like a state of the union here with the spice cabinet, because this is going to be my biggest friend right now to help this person. This is my arsenal. And so he's like, really? I'm like, yeah, really, like no joke, like this, I just want to see your spice cabinet, essentially, or your spice drawer, your spice bag, like whatever, like when you're making food that you're adding spices, I just want to check out your spices. And so he brings out this container. So I'm like, yay, there's spices in the house. That's great. Okay, some people will just have salt and pepper, right? Or if you come from an Asian family, you might have soy sauce and like a red pepper in a liquid form. He's got a little spice. He's got a little spice basket. So I'm like, could you put on some hot water, please? I'm sitting on the chair going through the spices. He's in the kitchen, and he puts on, because all I want to do is show him like how easy it is to actually just drink a spice tea, just to like help her get her digestion fired up a little bit. And I start pulling the spice bags apart. I'm like untying these things. And the first hit I get is tamas. We talked a little bit about the different energies, the gunas, rajas and tamas. And tamas is when something is stale, right? And that's like when you encounter staleness, especially if you're pretty aware and awake to freshness, staleness is really obvious. Right? If you ever walked into a musty cabin and just been like, ugh, and the energy just feels kind of overwhelmingly, ugh. When we just came down to Mexico and we get our condo professionally cleaned. There was a woman cleaning our condo for 4 days. It was cleaned 6 months ago before we left. Nothing happened here in between, but staleness builds up. And I've learned time and again, like I just can't handle it. So we pay someone who loves the work to clear out that energy. So when I walk in, it's fresh, right? And that's what I'm looking from a spice drawer. We're looking for freshness in spices. You want to change your spices every 6 months. Okay, so I'm going through and I'm like opening these like kind of musty bags of spices, and then I'm smelling it. And again, I'm smelling for how much of the intelligence of the seed or the plant. Most spices are seeds. Like think cardamom seeds, mustard seeds. Some are barks, like cinnamon is a bark. Like how much energy and intelligence of this plant is in this bag and its form, in its current form. And I'm noticing like on a scale of like 1 to 10, I'm in like the 2 range, like 1 to 2 range. So now it's not making sense to me. Right, because these are the spices that are cooked into her food. Otherwise, she's eating out in restaurants, so she's living in an urban lifestyle environment. So chances are she eats out quite a bit. But at home, on the scale of 1 to 10, like spices and no bueno. And now it's making a little bit of sense to me. Like, okay, the Agni in her food, her body type, her digestive type, just based on her constitution, requires quite a bit of spice. The basic rules of thumb for Vata type digestion is that a Vata diet should be warm. The food should be warm. It should be spiced. It should be liquidy, and it should be moderately oily. That these 4 qualities really help balance Vata type constitutions. They help balance Vishama Agni. So liquidy is that like combined 1 pot meal. It's easier to digest. Have the digestion take place in part outside the body before it enters the body. Have things combine before they enter the body. Okay, so the spices are musty. I'm going through and I'm just looking for things like, I'm actually looking for two spices now in particular. I'm kind of getting focused at this point. I'm thinking fennel right off the bat, because fennel seeds are not hot, they're slightly warm, and they tell air to go down. Right, they kind of do what the laxative does, but simultaneously they actually, so when they tell air to go down, but they actually warm the gut. They don't burn the gut. It's not like cayenne. It's just a nice little gentle warming of the gut. So I'm zoning right in. I'm like, what I want to see is, I want to see fennel seeds, and I'm not seeing them. There's no fennel in our little basket, so I'm kind of sad about that. But there's a Whole Foods not too far away, so I'm not too sad about it because it's going to be fennel right around the corner. The next thing I'm looking for is cardamom. Now, cardamom is it doesn't push air down like fennel does. There's only a few spices that push air, that tell air not to go up, that tell it to go down. And to me, this is such a great understanding Ayurveda, is that we start to see like people are intelligent, plants are intelligent, is we just want to mix like the right intelligence, the right place, the right time, and like magic happens fast, right? And so with fennel, and the other one is hing washtika. Hing is a resin, and it's mixed into a formula that's also called hing, which makes it a little confusing. But Hing is a very, very potent energy that says go down in the digestion. And one other thing that can really help with this is black salt. So black salt, Hing, and fennel. Fennel is everywhere. You can walk into the most conventional grocery store and buy fennel powder or fennel seeds. That McCormick Spice Company, the one that's like as conventional as it gets in the USA with spices, they have fennel seed powder in just about every grocery store. They also usually have fennel seeds, and they look yellow. You don't want to buy yellow fennel seeds. You want to buy green fennel seeds. Fennel seeds that are yellow means they've already past their prime. They're already in the tamasic zone as opposed to the sattvic zone. So that's why I recommend going somewhere like that, which is going to have high volume, right? Their spices are going to have much more high volume where you're not buying them in little containers. You're buying them like in the bulk section, and you open the jar and you smell it. So that's what I asked him to do. I said, there's these two spices. I'd love for you to go to Whole Foods with your daughter and just go smell spices, like just unscrew jars and see which spices like she gets excited about. Like she's just like, And if there's none, then just go with fennel and cardamom. And I would actually just get those anyways because they're so effective with this type of an imbalance. Okay, so cardamom, let's talk about cardamom for a hot second. So cardamom is a heartwarming herb. It works on the subtle energetic level. It works at, it's fascinating with the heart. It helps balance pitta. It's like, it's sweet. Digestively, it can imbalance pitta because it is hot. It's on the hotter side of warm. It's not like hot like peppers, but it's a lot hotter than fennel or coriander, even cumin or caraway. It's a little on the hotter side of that, and this huge spectrum of cold to hot. But it's, it's maybe about here. Cardamom is maybe a little bit more like, 60% toward hot, whereas fennel's neutral at in its hottest form. It's hitting at neutral. But when we combine these two, we have this heartwarming effect. So when someone has turned against their own body, I want to get them back in their heart. And when I was asking the dad, I was like, what does she want more than, that dysmorphia, which most anorexics do, where they think they're fat and they're skinny as a rail. I'm like, what does she want even more, than that? Like, what does she want even more than being skinny? Like, is there any, like, why would she want to live? Like, what does she really want? And the questions are pretty frightening to him because she's so obsessed with dysmorphia as this very common anorexia nervosa. Anything else. And so you got to kind of ask, well, why does she be skinny? Like, what is she hoping will happen from that? There's often, just exciting the will by asking these questions of like, what do you want? And what else do you want? And what else do you want? We're just trying to awaken desire in the heart. But we can also use something like cardamom, which is a digestive, which is going to actually help directly with Vishama Agni. And fennel cardamom is a very spice formula. So basic, right? Fennel seeds, cardamoms. And all you have to do is put them in hot water. You can even put the whole seed in. So if she mixed fennel cardamom, and I'd say, because her digestive tract is probably a bit sensitive at this point from all the starvation and then the laxatives and then eating foods that are not well spiced and like it's erratic in there at best, is I want to go on the gentler side. So I'd maybe do like twice as much fennel as cardamom. So like 2 teaspoons, I would maybe just make a little jar and put in 2/3 a cup of fennel and 1/3 a cup and mix it up, and then just put a teaspoon in a liter of hot water in the morning and then sip that throughout the day. But definitely to have a cup of it at least 20 minutes before eating. And all I'm trying to do is help energy go down and awaken digestion so that when she eats, it doesn't hurt. I want to reestablish that eating's not a painful experience. that absorbing nutrients is not a painful experience, that eliminating is not a painful experience, and that there's more to life, right? Like get the heart excited about, again, like there's nourishment feels good, life is good, there's more to look forward to. So I just wanted to get you guys a little bit centered on, you know, when you look at if you look at a person that has an imbalance, you're asking yourself about like, what is the Agni type? And that's a big part of what we do in Living Ayurveda is we start to understand things from an Ayurvedic perspective, like what is health, what is disease, what is the nature of this person, what's the nature of the disease, and like what are the easiest things to do. And so that was my, you know, as many tools I have in the kit, I came down to fennel seeds and cardamom seeds. Like, let's just start here. And Maya Tawari, in one of her earlier books, that was published, I think it's out of print now, but you can still get it used, on A Woman's Book of Practice Using Breath, Sound, and Food. She has a story there, and this is really this story helped me in this situation a lot. She has a story there of a young girl, I believe under the age of 10, who stops eating. And the mom takes her to Maya and says, like, my daughter has stopped eating. And so Maya basically, this is, you guys, where I learned this, you're going to learn, like, I'm not brilliant. I just listen to smarter people talk about. The girl would just sit at the table and just like basically like stare at the food and like move it around and not eat it. And soon she wouldn't even come to the table. Little girl. And so when she comes to Maya, and as Ayurvedic practitioners will have 10 to 20 spices that are fresh on hand in their little Ayurvedic rooms, right? And also stock a bunch of herbs that are really specific to different levels of tissue in the body. They always stock spices. So Maya just gets out a bunch of, you know, spices and just has the girl smell and says, you know, pick out your favorite ones. Which ones are your favorite? And so she finds a few, and so the mom says, okay, well, this is what you're going to do is you're just going to be at your kitchen counter and have a place for your daughter to sit. Like nothing has to be there besides the chair. And you're going to just grind these spices with a mortar and pestle. And so when you take a fennel seed and you break it, it's a bija, and the energy and the intelligence of the universe is in that seed, just like the energy and intelligence of each of us was in that first, when egg meets sperm, in that very first cell of who we are. Intelligence that became, you know, the same thing's true in a plant seed. It has the energy and intelligence of the universe. So when you grind these seeds, the energy and intelligence start to fill the room. It starts to move into the ether, and now you have Agni, of the power of fire, moving through ether. Now, if you go the extra step and you dry roast the spices, you dry roast the fennel seeds and the cardamom seeds, you're actually warming up that intelligence before you release it, which is why it smells so good. And so sure enough, like the mom starts to grind with the mortar and pestle, and soon the daughter's like, I want to do that. You know, kids are like, I want it, right? And so the little daughter starts to grind the seeds and then starts to eat them, and then starts to restore Agni and starts to restore digestive fire and desire to eat and desire to live. Because when we don't desire to eat, we don't desire to live. All right, so that's my little bit on Ayurveda and Vata imbalances with anorexia nervosa.